Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George. Today we're going to do something I've been meaning to do for a while. I just haven't gotten around to it for some reason. But we're talking about washes. Yeah, doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is. If you use any kind of quick painting or speed painting techniques, washes are a big part of your repertoire. And so I've got some washes here that I need to test. Specifically, what is the deal with Army Painter's Dark Tone and Citadel Colors Nuln Oil? Somehow, I've gone through over a year of painting minis and I've never used Nuln Oil. I've always assumed that they're interchangeable. This guy is the same as this guy. You're gonna have the same results, but something tells me I'm wrong. I use a lot of this. It's time to use some of this. Let's put them face to face and see how they flow, how they cover our model, and what they look like at the end. Are they really interchangeable? Let's find out. Yay! So here are the stars of today's episode. These are the washes that I want to compare. Like I've said before, I use this dark tone wash from Army Painter. I use it a lot. It is the linchpin of my quick painting approach. I use a glaze for base coat, and then I go over it with a wash, and it makes everything look really cool, very detailed, without a whole lot of muss and fuss. But I've never used Citadel's Nuln Oil, which I understand has about the same function. I have heard tell, though, that Nuln Oil is a little bit more complex. So the dark tone is pretty much a black wash. It's just black ink with some medium and what have you, and it does what it's supposed to do. I understand that the Nuln Oil has a little bit of like a brown tone to it. It seems a little bit more complex, and I just haven't used it because I don't use a whole lot of Citadel color. They're a little bit more expensive than Army Painter. They come in pots, which is less convenient for me. So I don't have much of experience with it, although I do use this guy a lot, the Fuegian Orange, to replicate rust on metallic figures. So I'm not completely, the Citadel color is not completely unknown to me. But this one for sure, I've never used it before. So I think it's time to get to know this color, or this shade. So I'm going to paint some models with, and wash them with this guy, do the same thing, and wash it with this guy. I have a wild card here, and that's this guy. This is a homemade wash. I made this a while back, maybe about a month and a half ago. I was running out of this guy and I was painting some terrain and I needed a lot of wash while my order of my real wash came in. So I looked around YouTube for some recipes and they were all basically the same. It was basically equal parts medium, equal with water, and about 10 drops of black ink, and that was that. So I made up a bottle, and I wasn't very happy with the results. But I figured I'd throw this in here so you can kind of see, right? So there's this whole thing about, hey, do it yourself, don't pay Games Workshop prices, or I guess even Army Painter prices. You can do this at home for pennies on the dollar. Can you really, though? At least, well, you know what? Before more of my opinion, let's find out. And by the way, I tried this before I had inks. I didn't have any inks. I had to go out and get some black ink from my local craft store. So before I had this, I tried this exact same recipe, but not using inks, using paint. That looks like this. In fact, it looks like this within like a day or two of me not moving it. This is what it's supposed to look like. This doesn't work. So I'm not even going to test it. In fact, I kept this bottle instead of throwing it away simply so I could make this video. I knew I was going to make a video like this one day. So, okay, that's enough of me talking. The test is going to be Army Painter's Dark Tone versus Nuln Oil from Citadel Color versus Homemade, and we'll see what they look like. Obviously, I need something to paint, and that's going to be these guys. This is just some scatter terrain from the Octarius box. It's like Orky Barricades. Now, I've Orcified them just a little bit more, so the terrain pieces don't have this thing right here. It's just this one slab. But I added this little piece to the side to make it a bit more substantial, and also because I just happened to have this bit from another piece of that of terrain from that same kit that I didn't use. I always wanted to use it as a bit for a base. It hadn't really happened for me, so I just decided, you know what, I'm going to make these a bit more interesting. So I slapped one of these things kind of to the side. To this one, I slapped it kind of on the back, and I made it look like it was a hasty job. Anyway, that's the plan. Each one of these is going to get its own paint and wash. So I'm going to start with a little bit of light gray base coat glaze. And I'm using a glaze here because this is how I typically paint my models. So I'm not going to deviate from that. So it's just a thinner, it's a little bit of gray paint. In this case I used ash gray from Army Painter, and I diluted it just a little bit with flow improver and just a drop of water, just so that it flows really nice and so that some of the undercoat, in this case the prime, kind of shows up under the glaze. So I'm going to paint these up. I also I hit them with my rotary tool because I wanted to give them a little bit of battle damage. I wanted to kind of represent how these have been shot at, and so I made some scores, some divots, some scratches, and even one hole, like a las cannon, ripped through one of these things, just to give them a little bit of extra visual interest. So once this glaze base coat goes on, I'm going to hit them with a wash and see how they feel. Alright, these guys are nice and dry, so I'm going to hit them with the wash. And the first one I'm going to try is this guy, the dark tone. I know exactly how it works. I know exactly how it feels. So this is basically my control. If this was a scientific experiment, that's how I would call it. And so I'm just going to dab it over everything, while, you know, still being careful to make sure to avoid any unsightly pooling. This next one I'm going to hit with my homemade dark wash, and I'm giving it a shake because I want it to have the best possible chance at success. I've used this before and I don't like the way it looks, but, you know, let's just be fair about it and slather it on just like I did with the other stuff. Yeah, this, it feels different, like the Army Painter, it feels thicker, so the recipe clearly is different. Like there's probably more, I don't know if it's either flow improver or medium. Well, it's not medium because medium tends to thicken the paint, I think. But there's something else happening with the Army Painter to make it thicker, and it collects in the crevices quite a bit better than this. But that's just how it feels. The important part of this is what it looks like. So let's finish painting, let it dry, and take a gander. At long last, it is time to check out the Nuln oil. So I can't put any of this on my wet palette because it's not a dropper, so I'm just going to have to work directly from the pot. And so right away, I can tell it's a lot thinner than the Army Painter. So for sure, this works differently. It has a different composition. It actually feels quite a bit more like the homemade recipe. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not as clingy as I'm used to anyway. The other observation, just kind of right off the bat, is that I don't see any of the browns or reds that I heard people talk about. At least on this gray, it looks very, very black. As in, that's kind of all the colors that are in here. Again, not bad, and for that matter, not even that far different from Army Painter. It's just different. So here are my little barricades. They've dried, and I started to talk about these in footage that I had to delete because I kept getting these confused, so I had to go back to my video and remark them. The point here is that these are fairly similar in the results. Similar enough that I couldn't keep them straight in my head. Even though I had a plan, when I started talking about them, I was like, wait, is that right? So I had to go back to the footage, and I've tagged them now, so I know exactly which one's which. And so we'll start by examining this guy. This is the dark tone. This is my control. This is how I usually, wash my models. And you can see it's fairly standard. You can see the shadows, the places where the wash accumulates. It's pretty dark, and there's an overall darkening of the raised surfaces. So the areas that aren't supposed to be shadows, that gray is also fairly a little darker. And you can tell by this piece. This piece I did not wash, so you can kind of see the difference in color. So this is quite a bit darker. No surprises here. This is how I expect my washes to work. This guy surprised the crud out of me. This is our homemade wash, and if you look at it, it doesn't look bad. It's a little lighter in color than the dark tone. Like, the overall impact is that this is darker overall than this, not by a ton, but it's a subtle difference. The other thing that I could probably say is that there's less pooling, and that isn't all that surprising because one of the reasons I like Army Painter is because it's a more viscous fluid, and so it does tend to stick together, and so when it pools, the pools are larger and darker. Here, the pools are, they're still there, and you can kind of tell. So this side of it, of the barricade, has a lot of little details, so you can kind of see where it's pooling, and it's darkening things up nicely, just like one would expect. It's a little less noticeable here because there's fewer nooks and crannies, but still overall, it's a nice result. If you look at the overall darkening, this seems a little lighter than the dark tone. But the biggest takeaway from this is I've used this homemade stuff before, and I did not like it. And as I'm looking at this guy, it's not bad. I fully expected to be talking about how this was atrocious, don't ever try this, because the one time I tried it before, it was gross. But now that I'm looking at it, it isn't bad. I would absolutely use this again. So maybe my last experience had more to do with the undercoat. Who knows? But this isn't bad. This right here is our Nuln oil. And this, again, the differences are pretty subtle, but this is probably more similar to the homemade than the army painter. And that makes sense, right? The videos that talked about how to make homemade wash, they were mostly using Nuln oil as their comparison. I mean, a lot of the titles were, make Nuln oil at home, not make dark tone from army painter at home. So it shouldn't be that surprising that the results for these two are fairly similar. If I look at the back here where all the details are, it looks like the Nuln oil is a little more delicate. Of the three, I think it has a lot less darkening than the others, so it looks like the raised areas aren't as impacted as the areas where it pools. Although the areas where it pools, it's also very subtle. It's much less pooling than this guy. Now down here, let's call that user error. I think maybe I wasn't as careful with the pooling and I didn't draw it away as much as I should have. But overall, it's pretty neat. The differences between the three, they're not huge. You could make the argument that you could use any of these and it'll be fine. But there are such subtle differences that maybe it makes sense for you to pick something for your own. So maybe in some cases you do want your Basecoat Glaze to be a lot darker. Maybe sometimes you want it to not be as dark, right? You wanted to just touch the shadows, and that's it. And so maybe Nuln oil is the way to go. And sometimes when you can go either way, but you have a large project or you just want to pinch a couple of pennies, this homemade stuff, it's not so bad. I was pretty surprised. So, turns out I will not be tossing this in the garbage. This one, yeah, it's gone. So, I've already talked a little bit about the results for each of these. I'm going to finish painting these up. There's some detail work to be done, and so I want to see what the end result of the model would look like using each of the three. I don't anticipate a ton of differences, but let's just take it out. Let's take this project to its conclusion so we can be as objective as we can. Here they are. These are my barricades. They're all painted up, detailed, and they look pretty decent. Although I'm realizing I'm pretty monochromatic with my painting. I do a lot of grays and blacks. I don't know that this is necessarily by design. It's just, I guess, what I'm comfortable with. In any case, you'll see that it's mostly concrete and metals. The metals have some rust markings, but they're not uniform. I just I emphasized the bottoms for rust, kind of telling the story that these things have been rained on and the rust kind of pulls towards the bottom, as you would kind of see in real life. There's gears on the back of each of these. It looks like these are maybe not necessarily man-portable, but they're deployable. So these gears here, it looks like these are 3 leaves and they expand, and so, or they collapse, and so that's what this is, I think, what's supposed to be happening here. So I painted these little handles yellow as a you know, as a place for people to grip. Although, given the additions that I have here, these are no longer portable. These are bolted down to the ground somewhere for a little bit of extra protection, as these partial I-beams would imply. But none of that is the point of this particular video. The point is the 3 different washes. And I don't know if you can tell the difference between them. If you can, you have a sharper eye than I do. Looking at these kind of in person, I'm gonna try to guess. I haven't. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this right here. This is gonna be my Army Painter Dark Tone. Let's see what that says. DT. Yeah, it's a very sloppy DT, but it's DT nonetheless. And I could tell this visually because this looks darker than the rest. I mean that like the concrete areas, these are a darker shade of gray than these. Maybe it's tough to capture on camera, but I think I'm looking at the screen here, and it looks like, in fact, this is at least subtly darker, but you can tell visually. The other way that I can tell is all these silver pieces. I didn't do a ton, but I did do some. On these silver pieces, these are noticeably darker than, say, this. Because this one was washed with this is Nuln oil. Yep. Nuln oil. Man, I just have so much trouble saying that. And so this one strikes me as much more delicate than the Army Painter. And what I mean by that is it has kind of a minimal impact on your model. It washes and it collects on the seams, but it kind of stays off as much as possible from the exposed surfaces. That isn't to say that it doesn't touch them, but it doesn't have as much of an impact. And there is where I think the major difference between the Army Painter and the Citadel Color black washes come from, or arrive at, I guess. If you want darker, if you want more significant pooling, this is the way to go. I still really like the dark tone, and I'll probably use this as my default. However, if I ever need a light touch where I need those shadows, but I need like a thinner shadows, I think I'm going to start using some of this stuff. Yeah, it's more expensive and it's inconvenient and flip-top bottle, right? It's got a lot of drawbacks, but I can see this helping with, like, for example, my Tau. My Tau, they all have this gray color, and I wanted to do the panels without doing any panel lining, little creases. Anyway, I've used this one before, and it looks kind of sloppy. It does the job, but I wish it could look better. I think this might actually do the trick. If I do Tau again, maybe this is the way to go with the Nuln oil. My biggest surprise for this video was this guy. This is that homemade Nuln oil, or the homemade dark wash, and it does a pretty good job. I am pretty impressed. I will say, however, that there's one major difference. So, like Nuln oil, it's fairly delicate. It doesn't do a lot of staining of the raised areas. It does some kind of the pooling is a little, I don't know. It's a little wild and unpredictable. But I will say that over the silver, this metallic stuff, it almost makes no impact whatsoever. It's over the gray stuff, it's over the non-metallic paints where this stuff seems to be useful. And I think this is what I noticed the first time when I used this homemade Nuln oil. I did it over like a silver primed model, and it looked gross. I didn't like it. And so this is something I'm going to have to continue experimenting with, because at the end of the day, this stuff is cheap to make. Like you need some matte medium, you need some water, you need an ink. And so, yeah, maybe you don't have those lying around the house. Hold, please. I just realized I was talking about this and I haven't really told you how to make it. You need a bottle of this. It's matte medium, about equal parts with some water. Here, my pipette. And then you also need some ink. This is acrylic ink. That was recommended. You can use black, you can use like a dark brown. You have some options if you want to make it different shades of this wash. And it works really well. Do not try substituting the ink for paint, because bad things will happen. This is gross. You want no part of that. The big advantage to this stuff is that it is cheap. Yeah, I mean, this isn't free, but it's a huge bottle. Like, this will make a bunch of these. This, not so much, but it's not that expensive. I think combined, you're probably looking at $15, maybe $20, but this is going to make you multiple bottles of this thing. It's going to be way cheaper than buying this stuff, or even this stuff. So this is a legitimate way of washing your models. Your mileage may vary. I'm going to stick to using it for non-metallics, and probably for things I don't care much about, or like scenery, terrain, and things like that. But I for sure will be experimenting with this. It's piqued my interest. At any rate, I'm all done with these guys. I'm pretty happy with the way they turned out. And these barricades are mine. No one else's barricades look quite like mine, and that's the way I like it whenever it's relatively easy. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope, more importantly, that you learned something and that you will decide to experiment a little bit. If you use only this, try some of this. It's slightly different, and it'll have interesting results for you. Maybe you'll use it in a way that you can't use this, what have you. If you've ever thought about making your own, yes, it's possible. Even this guy can do it. So if I can do it, you can too. And play around with your washes. If you use quick painting techniques for most of your builds, for at least some of your builds, washes are a critical part of your toolkit. So you deserve to know as much about your toolkit as you can possibly know. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace!